This is part 7 of chapter 2, The Manipulated Mind, Denise Wynn. The third and final stage of brain inhibition Pavlov called ultra-paradoxical. Now the dog reacted with a positive response where normally it had a negative one, and vice versa. For instance, it would try to elicit affectionate attention from a laboratory assistant it had previously disliked and attack one it had previously been fond of. Once these 3 stages had been set and trained, Pavlov noticed the dogs often behaved in a hypnoidal fashion. Sargent remarks that clinical reports of patients under hypnosis often reveal them to act in ways consistent with Pavlov's inhibition phases. A final unexpected discovery occurred for Pavlov when his dogs were nearly drowned during the Leningrad floods as they were trapped in their cages. At the last minute, a laboratory assistant was able to rush in and save them, but the terror of the experience, a stress beyond all stresses, produced yet another brain response. The dogs forgot all that they had been taught by conditioning up to that point. That is, all the conditioned reflexes that Pavlov had implanted in them had vanished, and it took months to restore them. Pavlov believed that the higher centers of the brain in dogs and in humans were in a constant state of flux between excitation and inhibition, that when one part was highly excited, another area was inhibited as a result. For instance, a person undergoing an ecstatic experience may be temporarily oblivious to pain. He also noted that one part of the brain cortex, which had been overexcited, might become fixed, leading to a pattern of repetitious movements or behavior. He thought this might explain, for example, obsessional thinking. Sargent uses these findings from Pavlov to extrapolate about the mechanisms of recovery from shell shock, religious conversions, and the eliciting of false confessions. He maintains that those who believe the exercise of willpower is sufficient to beat the brainwashers are sadly mistaken. Active resistance only puts yet more pressure on the brain and speeds breakdown. After his reading of Pavlov's work, Sargent says he became aware how far the behavior of shell-shocked soldiers whom he was treating at the time accorded with Pavlov's inhibition stages. Some, for instance, might be suffering severe fright paralysis of the limbs. If they tried to move them, they couldn't. But if they were thinking about something else, they were amazed to find that they could move the paralyzed limb. An example of the paradoxical stage, says Sargent. Men who came to the clinic in a state of nervous breakdown and emotional paralysis could be released from their suffering if Sargent induced an abreaction, an intense emotional discharge. This might be achieved by giving them a drug to help lower their defenses and then coaxing them to talk of the experience that they had had and which they had till now repressed. If the soldiers could be drawn to the limits of their endurance in this way, they experienced a sudden intense outpouring of their feelings and a reliving of the events in question, an exhausting experience that led them finally into emotional collapse. When they finally came out of it, they were like different men. They could see what had happened in perspective. They could face up to the horrors and fears they had undergone in the trenches. The principle of emotional discharge, the release of locked-in emotions, is behind most modern psychotherapies. However, Sargent makes a significant point. The abreaction could be induced even if the events being reacted to were implanted by the doctor and had never happened. For instance, the doctor might ask the patient to describe himself fighting his way out of a burning tank, and the patient would eventually experience emotional collapse, even though the event had never happened. What is vital to Sargent, therefore, is not the unblocking of repressed memories and their concomitant emotions, but the buildup of stress to its extremes, by whatever means, with a view to eliciting a freeing emotional discharge. After the abreaction was over, the men lost their fright paralysis, or whatever compulsive behavior pattern had been established. All that neurotic behavior had been knocked out by the collapse. Sargent sees this as akin to what happened with Pavlov's dogs. In using Pavlov's findings to explain seemingly inexplicable religious and political conversions, Sargent stresses the suggestibility state that is engendered as a result of extreme anxiety. He recalls how the terrors of the Blitz enabled large numbers of people to believe unlikely stories, such as the rumors following Lord Haw Haw's broadcasts from Germany. Sargent relates such occurrences back to Pavlov's finding that once extreme stress was induced, dogs could be made to give up their old conditioning in order to take on the new set of responses conditioned by the laboratory assistants. And if they were of balanced temperament, they would hold onto those new behavior patterns as firmly as they had resisted losing the old. Sargent sees this mechanism working in revivalist meetings where extreme emotional stress induced by the preaching, the atmosphere, the guilt and fear, led to collapse and then adoption of the new thinking. Similarly, in Korea, the Chinese in effect used the same breakdown system to implant a new set of beliefs. Pure intellectual indoctrination, he says, would be useless. A proof that it is stress of any kind that is the key to conversion rather than underlying sympathy with the new views might be, as Sargent suggests, the fact that those who attended Wesley's evangelistic meetings and were roused to a pitch of anger and indignation at what was going on were just as likely to break down under the stress of the negative emotion and come to saved. Sargent also cites Arthur Koestler's account of the night he made his decision to become a communist. He remained with the party 6 years. Koestler himself says that a whole series of grotesque events clinched the making of a decision he had been moving towards for some time. The events in question were a heavy hangover, a broken down car, a heavy financial loss at poker, and a drunken sexual encounter with a person he disliked. None of the stresses were connected with or threw light on his position as regards communism, but they precipitated his sudden decision to join the party. Any extreme experience of emotion can make a person highly suggestible and either reverse his conditioned behavior patterns or else wipe them out altogether, according to Sargent. The degree of stress and the individual's level of ability to withstand stress will determine the actual outcome. And that was part 7 of chapter 2, and we will pick up with video number 8 in the next video. We are reading from The Manipulated Mind. See you there.